Hello everyone, Chad Martin with Data Prep U here. We are here today with something a little bit different and a little special. So our Director of Analytics, Matt Agnello, is joining me for the first time in some time. And we're going to be talking through one of the products that we've actually built out for our customers and something that we could even customize for you. So this is focused on more of a supply chain scenario using Tableau as our primary means of delivering some additional insight and data analysis through a customized dashboard on spend analytics. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Matt for a little introduction on who he is, and then we'll jump right into it.
Thank you so much, Chad. Thanks for having me. I'm Matt Agnello, Director of Data Analytics at Data Prep U, and excited to take you through this example of a spend analysis dashboard that we'll be walking through today. Some of the potential use cases, who would use it, and how it works, and some of what we're going to be looking at behind the scenes.
All right, so thank you so much, Matt, again, just for taking the time to come down with us. So as you know, and as many other folks may know as well, my background is not necessarily in the visualization side of things. Like, my background is more around, data pipelining, automation, using software like Alteryx to try and, connect to multiple different data sources and so forth to create a more automated process. So dashboards, to me, I know that a tremendous amount of people find them valuable, but I'm probably going to be asking some questions that might seem a little more basic or a little more straightforward for you, but that definitely help me understand. So the first question that I actually have is, what are we looking at? Like, what does this actually show us? Just, give me a high level.
Yep, so this is a spend analysis dashboard. And so what this really shows is an overall picture of our direct and indirect spend. So if you were the, say, a CXO, so the CEO, CFO, or even Chief Purchasing Officer, and you wanted to understand the current state of your supply chain, who am I spending money with? What am I spending it on? When is that spend going to happen? And who's actually placing the orders internally? This is a place that you can go to get those high-level insights.
Awesome. Okay, great. So you mentioned the CFO and the CPO, Chief Purchasing. I think previously I thought it was Chief Product Officer, because that's a lot of my background as well. So are those the only ones who would use this? Would be people in the C-suite, or could other people in the organization find this helpful as well?
I really think this could be anyone in the organization. When we were talking about the leadership team, but beneath that, right, any team leader, buyer, sourcing manager, supply chain manager, even outside of that, right, there are other parts of the organization that would find this beneficial. When am I getting my material? Is this PO closed? Anyone in finance, right? So really, that expands beyond just the C-suite to be able to gain insights from a dashboard like this.
Awesome. So why would we use a dashboard? So why a dashboard? Because, traditionally, we know a lot of our customers have Excel, all over the place, right? So, and even though Excel does have a lot of, visual capabilities, and they've been increasing what their capability is, it still isn't anything like what I've seen here today. So, can you use other things, or, why would you want to use a dashboard over some of the more traditional means?
Yeah, and as you know, with the clients that we work with, Excel is within their comfort zone. Okay. Right? But as you transition and expand or travel along that analytic journey, you find that there are some limitations with Excel, right? Based on the sheer volume of records it can handle is fairly small. Not to mention, numbers just don't seem to jump out at you, right? At least for me, looking at a spreadsheet, I can't really understand the trends in the data. I can't understand the patterns. And a lot of what we do within the organization, right, from an industry perspective or consulting perspective, is trying to identify those patterns and relationship in the data.
Okay.
So a tool like this helps you explore and draw out those insights that we wouldn't traditionally see with a spreadsheet in Excel. I would also say that in terms of the interactivity that we can gain from this, right, looking at a spreadsheet, it's hard to click around and move things within a spreadsheet or even a pivot table. This is completely dynamic. So as we click on one element of the screen, the rest of it will change. So we can filter on clicking a name within Supplier Pareto, clicking a category within spend category, even clicking on a buyer name. So we can quickly gain insights by slicing the data one direction or another.
Awesome. So that actually kind of leads me into my next question quite well then, which is, where do I get started? So if I'm looking at this, someone such as myself, let's say I'm not the Chief Purchasing Officer, or let's say that I am the Chief Purchasing Officer, where do I start? I know that I personally am not, but where would I start with something like this? How would I begin to get a better idea or a better picture of what our supply chain looks like.
Yeah, so for this dashboard specifically, we're looking at a few key elements. One is understanding the buy, right?
Okay.
And that's looking at the spend categories in the middle. With an ERP system, we have hundreds or thousands of transactions, of invoices or purchase orders. So being able to categorize that onto a more hierarchical level, we can see here all those transactions related to marketing, computers, equipment and ops, professional services, so we can have a better understanding on a categorical level where we are actually spending the money. In addition to that, understanding the partners. So who are we spending money and investing in terms of our supplier relationships? And we can see in descending order of spend, all those suppliers listed on the top right side. The third element is, when is that spend happening? Did we spend more last year than we did this year? And if so, why is that? We can apply filters to be able to see that. We can see across the bottom chart here, all that spend over time. And that element of time is actually embedded within a number of different views here. We can see the tooltip pop up as we scroll over to gain even more insight on the data of this dashboard.
So you mentioned this, and I was picturing this as well, that we do have the time-based elements in a couple of different areas. So even for me, I can see the trend very easily, right? Where the different categories and how they've drastically changed, or if there is a consistent growth pattern, among those different areas as well. So it makes it very easy to see. I get it. So, so we have some individual, more granular, information. I love the tooltip that pops up, within the specific buyer's, pie, piece of the pie here.
Yeah.
What are these numbers at the top here? What are they showing us?
So these are what we call BANs, officially known as big aggregated numbers, unofficially known and affectionately known as big ass numbers. And these are essentially...
Do we need to bleep that out? I don't know if we actually
we might need to. These essentially show us the aggregated measure associated with the different dimensions that we have across the dashboard. So some of the key elements of what we're looking at as a supply chain organization are: how much are we spending? How many suppliers do we have? What's the count of purchase orders? And what's the savings that we've been able to achieve from the deals that we've negotiated? Awesome. And so these are always displayed at the top to be able to give us perspective on these different things that we're filtering on. So for instance, if we click on marketing, our whole dashboard will filter to a marketing view, and we can see those numbers update. Spend now 58 million, savings at 5.7, 2,181 purchase orders, and around 500 suppliers.
And that's specifically for marketing. And I'm guessing that we can also dive directly into a specific supplier as well in the same way, and it will also be just as dynamic. Is that correct?
That is correct. Okay. Yep, we can apply multiple filters at once. So if we click back into marketing, we'll see all the marketing suppliers. We can then go into East Coast, Oceania, and this will all filter to their view, right? All within the same look and feel of the initial dashboard. We can remove this filter, and now this will be all of East Coast spend across those different categories.
Awesome. And I've noticed a couple of things as well in here that are just starting to stand out to me a little bit. So I see all the numbers, and they're definitely telling a much better story than looking at a spreadsheet. But I'm also seeing a couple of other indicators here. So there's some color coding that on the Supplier Pareto. Can you help me understand? Like what exactly am I looking at? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's two elements that are laid on top of each other within this view.
I feel like I want a touch screen, by the way.
Yeah,
like I really
like a touch screen.
Yeah,
I've been trying to touch this. Yeah. We can see the bars that are located on, and this represents the amount of spend over a given period of time.
For each supplier, correct? Okay.
Correct, for each supplier. And that date range right now is across the full data set of February 2011 through end of June 2015. But we also have, and the depth of color there is related to the spend. So we can see the darker blue versus the lighter blue. And I think what you're referring to also, along with that, are the green dots that we see across the right.
Correct.
Now, what this view shows us is Supplier Pareto. And as we know, Pareto is essentially the spend is 80% of the 20% of count. So
80-20 rule.
Exactly, exactly. So we can see here the top 80% of suppliers that represent 20% of the count. And as we scroll down, that 80% we can see in the top green, and at a certain point we'll transition to red. And so this represents, you can see the cumulative total ends at 80% there of the spend and the count. So as we transition, we can see those dots in red as the more fragmented spend.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. So I'm getting a better understanding of all of the different components in here. But let's say you are talking to a CXO, they're going to have questions, right?
Absolutely.
So let's say we're presenting this, we're building this out for a customer, we present this, and we're going through the kind of initial presentation. I'm confident they're going to have a number of different questions that they're just going to start firing off just out of sheer curiosity that isn't necessarily on the function of the dashboard, but what is it actually telling me? So I got a couple of questions that I've written down based on what I've seen up here. And so first one is, which supplier has the most spend in the professional services category? How would I find that out?
And by the way, I completely agree with you. I've never been able to get past the second line of a presentation without someone from the C-suite firing some questions. So we're looking for the professional services category, and we're looking for the top supplier. Is that right?
Top supplier, professional services, yeah.
All right. So I've clicked on professional services and fees in our spend category. That's going to filter the dashboard to that category. Let's scroll to the top of this Pareto list. I can see East Coast Oceania Disposal as the top supplier. And actually, as I click on that and unfilter this view, we should also see their location update to Chicago.
All right. So what would be my open commitment then? Like, how do I find out that opens to? Let's take East Coast Oceania Disposal. What is my commitment to them right now?
Right. So if we look, now that we've filtered on professional services and East Coast, we're looking at the spend over time at the bottom right, and we can see by year that gray area, which is open. So this is essentially spend that we have on a purchase order, but has not been invoiced yet. And so we can see that growing actually throughout the years. So in 2014, we still have some remaining items that need to be invoiced to us, as well as 2015, a large open commitment of around, and let me scroll over here, we can see the tool type pop up, 1.403 million.
Wow, okay. So I've also noticed, and we haven't really dived into the map a ton, but a lot of my background has been in mapping, so I understand this, and I'm a huge fan of maps just because I feel like it's very easy for everyone to get a base understanding of what we're looking at when there is a map present. So let's start taking into account something in that nature. So there's no surprise that just over the last couple of years there have been some very interesting events that have greatly disrupted the supply chain. So let's say that there was a natural disaster in the Houston area. How do I know what gets affected in there? So let's say all the power gets cut off. There's another hurricane type of situation. Where do we, or I guess, how does that affect us?
Absolutely. So yes, I'll tell you, I love maps too. I find them really easy to relate to. And I think they're a great component to add to every dashboard. And specifically here, related to your question around being able to pinpoint where a natural disaster, which is very specifically focused geographically, would affect the supply chain. So let's take a look. I'm going to pull up Houston as an example here so we can see the map update around Houston. And I'm just going to draw a lasso around the greater Houston area all the way up to College Station. And this is a great inbuilt functionality of Tableau to be able to use different selection methods within the map to be able to isolate even if you don't know the specific points on the map. So now that we have all the suppliers selected, we can understand how much spend has happened there. If we want to look at what our open commitments are, so things that maybe goods or services that haven't been performed yet, specifically goods that may not be shipped because of that natural disaster, we can see what that open commitment is within each year of PO creation. So really looking at 2015, around 717,000 across categories.
So we immediately, with that in mind, we know that that could be affected. So maybe we need to come up with some other way of setting expectations around that number for that particular year.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
And not only that, but at the moment of or understanding if there is a natural disaster coming or if one has already happened, being able to specifically reach out to the right folks at the right time. We can see here the suppliers listed that represent these suppliers on the map. And beyond this, now that we know the supplier, who do we have reach out to them? Let's find the buyer for Pacific North. We can look at those buyers listed there.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay.
We can even go to a different view and find the specific buyers related to POs for that supplier.
So you're starting to answer my next question already, which is more on how do we think more strategically about this, right? So how can we use this to be more data driven, to make more strategic decisions around our supply chain or about our supply chain. So how would we do this? Or have we already covered that, or are there additional things that additional steps we could take too?
There's a few things that I want to re-emphasize on that point. So I'm going to quickly click out of this map to just get back to our initial view. So we had talked about the Supplier Pareto earlier, and with the large number of suppliers that we have over 1,000 or 1,100 suppliers, and because of that fragmented spend that we see at the bottom of this list, a lot of these suppliers are spending, or we are spending less than $1 million with, in this case, even less than $100,000 with, for most suppliers. And this is going to be consistent across categories. If we look at marketing, if we look at computer equipment and ops. So being able to consolidate that spend into just the top few strategic suppliers. So identifying and starting with this top list within, say, marketing, for example.
Okay.
Who is a good candidate for a strategic relationship with? And this is going to be a business decision based on their ability to service these contracts, deliver on time, whether they're good development partners. And once you've chosen those suppliers, then taking the rest of that fragmented spend within, say, the marketing category and pushing that up and consolidating it and leveraging that spend with those top suppliers. So we've now limited or lowered the cost of administration of those contracts. So we have less buyers spending time on that, less administration, less phone calls. We also have lower spend because we've leveraged that for better contracts.
Awesome. So let's say we take these recommendations, right? So the things that you're seeing based off of what our data is telling us here, we take those recommendations and we move forward. How do we track our progress, or can we track our progress?
That's a great question. Right now, we're looking at more of an exploratory view, right? So this is gaining insights on our spend, direct or indirect, across categories. But this naturally leads to the next step of the process, right? We have recommendations. We want to transform our organization to be more data-driven, to be more strategic in nature around some of these changes that we discussed. And so we want to track progress against that. And we can do that all within the same dashboard. Right now, these are all absolute numbers.
Okay.
But what we can add to this are metrics, targets. We can establish benchmarks and baselines from where we are today and where we want to go to. And so we can also have that expand throughout the organization. So each team may have a target. And as you enter into the dashboard, you're tracking your progress against each of these things.
Awesome. So if I'm hearing you the way that I think I'm hearing you, yes, we have kind of the out-of-the-box functionality here, but we can also then further customize this based off of specific KPIs or specific goals of each organization, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
All of this can be customized. We can add in additional elements, and I think the way that you're heading with this is absolutely important for being able to improve, right?
Sure.
You need to know where you are today, which is what we
Yeah.
see here. We also need to know where we're going, and we need to track our progress against that. So ideally, we would add in additional components of those metrics and KPIs.
Definitely. The number one thing that I've remembered from multiple conversations, whether it's in business, whether it's for your career, whether you're working on fitness goals, or anything, it's you need to have goals. You need to set those goals, and we need to be able to track against those goals. So I think that's fantastic. So let's say we start implementing these changes. We've been talking about some very high level, organization-wide type of changes. What about the more tactical side of things, the more granular, like to individual teams? How can our individual teams start to use something like this to also make decisions at that smaller level?
That's a perfect question. This picture will not change often from day to day, right? Our top suppliers are our top suppliers. Our categories look the same. Year over year, we'll see some variance, but this is great at understanding the strategic level, right? But your question is more so, how do we use this today tactically to even enhance our ability to deliver to the rest of the organization from the supply chain on POs that we have currently outstanding? So we have a separate report here on the top right side. I'm going to click that to navigate to our PO report. Now this provides a more granular level of the individual POs that made up the overarching view that we saw earlier. And right here, we still have those BANs across the top. Remember, those are our top core components of what we're looking at: spend, savings, purchase orders, suppliers. Beneath that, we now have categorized POs that are late and closed. Right? We want to follow up with suppliers, understand what the situation was there. Close on time, that's great. They should get credit for that. Open late, that's going to be a very important one. So where do we have current POs that have not had any activity in terms of delivery of their goods or any performance on them if they're services? So we can see here, if we scroll over any of these particular items on the Gantt chart listed by line item PO, what the vendor is, who the vendor is, what their status is, the PO line number, the created date of the PO, when it was requested for, versus today's date. And we can see here, Japanese Jumbo, unfortunately, is 2 years late on their contractual obligation to deliver. So we can follow up with those.
We might need to look into that.
Important. And in some cases, this may be an error, right? Something didn't get closed out in the ERP.
Sure.
But at least we now have insight to that and transparency within the reporting to be able to address some of those things and more appropriately take action.
Well, and even just thinking about my role, here at Data Prep U, I'm looking at this personally about the purchase orders, and being able to see this this Gantt chart with all of the different color coding, making it very easy to see who's late, who's on time, and then we can start to trend on that, right? We can start to build reporting around that, who's consistently one of our most reliable vendors or sources or suppliers. So that's fantastic. I really like that.
Yeah, this tool gives you the ability to address the most important things to you.
Yeah.
Right. It won't solve your problems itself, but it gives you that insight and that transparency, and
awesome.
And allows you to do that.
That's fantastic. So, so based on my background, right? So, more on the engineering side of things, more on the pipelining side of things. How long does it take to put together a dashboard like this? What does that entail?
I'll say the short answer is it depends. And of course, no one ever wants to hear that. But let me give you a more specific estimate. I would say something like this is 2 to 6 months.
Okay.
And a lot of that, it depends on the cleanliness of the data, the connectivity to data sources,
sure,
etc., as well as the end state or the goal of what you want to be able to visualize. So, some of the things that we're keeping in mind as we go through that process is, what are the data sources? Are we just working from an extract that will be manually refreshed? Are we building a data pipeline, as you had mentioned? And I'm sure you could expand on that. But,
sure.
Connected to dynamic data sources from databases, or any variety of sources, right? It may not just be one database. There may be multiple sources to bring in those targets, metrics, invoices, purchase orders, and other organizational goals.
I would even argue that there's almost certainly multiple data sources, right, in order to be able to fully create a big picture like this. So so then what happens if your data, you mentioned cleanliness of data, you mentioned data access. One of my prior roles was customer support at a software company, and I think something around 70% of our calls were just connectivity. How do I connect this, or I can't connect this? So that's kind of an easy one, because that really boils down to, do you actually have access to that data source that was granted to you by IT? But in many cases, maybe it has nothing to do with that. It is all around the cleanliness of that data. So what happens if that data isn't clean? What happens if you don't have, that nice, perfect, data set that we often see in the tutorials?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's never 100% clean, right? There's always work to be done.
Yeah.
You never start with a training data set. So in reality, there is a lot of work that needs to be done up front. And this is consistent across any data analysis. The first step is that standardization, prep, blend, and cleanse of the data. And so we're going to see a lot of that in real world experience as we're building out these dashboards, is starting with understanding the data and working with the team to make sure that we can aggregate the measures that we want to aggregate. Are we focused on the fields that we need? And are we understanding that data correctly enough to be able to display it on a dashboard?
Yeah.
And that second step of standardization and cleansing. So when we look back at our PO, our summary dashboard, are we assigning the right categories of spend? And are we working with your team to align those to make strategic sense for how you organize your business? Do we have consistency in the supplier names, right? And if we look at this top example, East Coast Oceania, disposal, and airlines, would we prefer to see those as one consolidated supply, right? If it's
'cause
just
they're still
subsidiaries of a holding company.
Yeah.
And so, in that case, their spend would look much larger. And that makes a big difference when you look at suppliers.
Well, and you bring up something very, very interesting in here. And I'm seeing a couple of, they're not duplicates, but they're clearly part of the same parent organization. And I mean, I can think of a couple of different ways of doing that. Maybe you're doing the aggregation prior to getting the dashboard. Maybe you're doing the aggregation in the dashboard. But I think the key that I'm talking about, or where I'm going with this, is more of the customizability. We keep talking about customization. We've talked about customization in terms of, adding in KPIs, adding in goals so we can track our own progress towards those goals. But that could go into just the data itself as well. And I'm sure virtually anything, but can you expand on that a little bit on the customization?
Absolutely. So this is not an out-of-the-box solution, right? We have kind of the bare bones or the building blocks to be able to do that.
Okay.
But a lot of the value that we get from this is the customization aspect.
Okay.
Right. So everyone's organization is different. Everyone's goals are different. And so this view may not work for everyone. And that's totally fine. We would expect that. So what we want to do is design with that end state in mind, starting with understanding what your goals are, understanding what you want to track, what makes sense and what's important for you, and then working backwards to understand what the layout and design looks like, and then moving backwards from there and organizing data around that, and even the data sources that support this end visual. So every single thing that you see here is customizable, and we would work collaboratively with your team to be able to understand what the end state is.
Awesome. And I'm guessing here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing a tremendous amount of individual pieces that have all gone into this entire dashboard. So we talked about 6 months or upwards of around 6 months, which includes a tremendous amount of prior data work and interviews and things like that. But I'm guessing that there's probably other more immediate insight that we can get based on the need of the organization for some more specific types of things just throughout. Like, I'm thinking of the idea of a minimum viable product, right? So, start small and then continually expand until we eventually get to the entire thing, but being able to make immediate decisions on certain aspects while we're continuing to build out the full solution as well. Would you say that is accurate? Is not accurate?
That is accurate. And so even though we're designing with that end goal in mind, we build view by view, right? And we start with the most critical ones first. And so we would essentially work up to that point. You could absolutely, I think it's great. I didn't even think about the fact that we have all these listed out here, but you can see there's only 2 dashboards and 20 supporting views. So each of these elements could be used in an intermediary step to be able to gain some insight in the meantime as we build out the rest of the dashboard.
Very awesome. All right. So one final question. Let's say, we've got a customer, that is interested, or they just want to learn more. How do they get started?
Yeah, thank you, Chad. So we would absolutely love to hear from you, and I'd love to have a conversation about the unique situation that you have, anything that you want to visualize, whether it's spend analysis or something else, right? Any dashboard for your organization. We'd love to have a conversation, and we would be able to help you gain an understanding of what the timeline might be and the cost as well. I want to thank you all for your time, and Chad, I'll hand it back to you.
Matt, thank you as well for your time. Thanks for taking the trip down here. Exactly what Matt said. If you do have some other additional need, whether it comes from that data engineering, building out a visualization, and I would say even most importantly, just even asking the question of what should we be looking at? What should our KPIs be? We're happy to have those more strategic level conversations as well as the conversations around actually building out those solutions so you can make those data-driven decisions. Thanks again, Matt. Thanks again to everyone who's watching. Let us know what questions you have and down in the comments, or you can email us directly at support@dataprepu.com. Otherwise, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.